They say it's working. I don't know if people can hear me in the back. Does it?
She said it's because so many people are talking.
Is that right? Whenever you're ready. Blame it on me. Good afternoon. My name is I am the director of the Georgetown Juvenile Justice Clinic, and on behalf of Georgetown and the ABA, I'd like to welcome you all to this wonderful meeting at this historic date and time. I'd like to also thank the other sponsors, DLA Piper and the whole list of people who are on your program. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just to tell you that this is an amazing group of people who've come together to plan an amazing session. I would be remiss if I didn't thank especially Kiana Graham and Chris Gowan from the ABA and from Georgetown for all the work that they've done putting this together. Since the late 19th century, American policymakers have known that adolescents were different from adults, that they made mistakes, and that they should be held accountable for their acts in age-appropriate ways. Our first attempt at translating these concepts into policy was the first juvenile court founded in Chicago in 1899. The shortcomings of those early attempts were further remedied by the Supreme Court decision in In re Galt in 1966. And yet the promises of the 19th century progressives and the due process guarantees provided by the Supreme Court still somehow remain elusive. The harsh legislation of the 1980s and 1990s have pushed us to fair and appropriate treatment for young people caught up in crime. Many organizations, some of those noted in your program today, have fought for many years to secure fair and just treatment for children. Georgetown's Juvenile Justice Clinic and the American Bar Association are but two of them. We have all come together today knowing that rehabilitation provided by well-run juvenile courts can save the lives of children and protect our communities. We come together at this incredibly historic moment in the history of the United States to seek new solutions in a town where those solutions must emanate from. I would also say, for those of you who have been interested in juvenile justice for some time, that the initiatives will not just be federal, they will be local, and they will also be international. We understand that the American Committee for the Ratification for the Convention on Children's Rights is gearing up for a major initiative to have that convention ratified by the Senate. We have 58 Democratic votes and several people on the Republican side ready to implement that treaty. And so I think finally, after all these years, we'll be moving forward on that as well. With us today, we're fortunate enough to have the President of the American Bar Association, H. Thomas Wells. Mr. Wells is a founding member of the firm of Maynard, Cooper & Gale in Birmingham, Alabama. He's the former chair of the ABA's House of Delegates, and he's a firm supporter of the ABA's efforts of long-standing in the area of juvenile justice. Thank you, Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Wally. I don't think you'll have trouble hearing me. I'm a trial lawyer. I'm used to projecting. It's really a privilege to welcome all of you to this town hall meeting, a call of action for juvenile justice. You know, before I became the president of the American Bar Association, I was already involved in youth activities. I spent, as you can only do in a YMCA organization, 3.5 years of a 2-year term as chair of the YMCA of Metro Birmingham, where we were heavily involved in youth activities, as most YMCAs are across the country. My wife, Jan, is also the liaison to the ABA Commission on Youth at Risk. So youth is a very important part of our personal as well as the agenda of the American Bar Association. You know, today's discussion quite frankly, couldn't be more timely or more relevant, coming just 2 days after what can only be described in understated terms as our historic election. The ABA is pleased to serve as a host and a facilitator for this town hall so that many of the leading voices with juvenile justice and youth serving community can express their opinions. For the past 2 years, the ABA has been working intensively with many of you toward enactment of legislation to reauthorize and strengthen the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act. We're also working with many of you toward passage of the Youth Promise Act, which will provide positive community alternatives to gang activity. These legislative goals will undoubtedly be an important part of the discussion today. This town hall meeting, I'm proud to say, belongs to all the participants here today. The ABA's role is simply to provide a forum to discuss and convey the policy views of all the participants without any filter or organizational imprimatur. We're fortunate to have this opportunity to the ABA Criminal Justice Section in putting together this forum. We owe a debt of gratitude to the section's chair, Anthony Joseph. AJ happens to be a law partner of mine, and he wanted me to send his personal greetings today. Unfortunately, he is actually back in Birmingham practicing law, I hope making some money, so that I can be here today. But AJ sends the Juvenile Justice Committee and its co-chairs, Charles Ogletree and Catherine Rickman. By the way, I would be remiss if I didn't say it's really an honor to be back here with my friend Professor Ogletree, who among his many accomplishments is now a star on Comedy Central. I also want to add my thanks to Chris Gowan, who's put this together, our young staff person who to put this together, and obviously thanks to the Georgetown Law School for hosting us. Thank you all for being here today, and we all look forward to a very lively and informative discussion. Thank you very much, Wally.
You have extended biographies of the panelists in your material, but let me just tell you a little bit about each of them as they begin to speak. With us today is Pennsylvania State Senator Stewart Greenleaf. Senator Greenleaf chairs the Pennsylvania Senate Judiciary Committee and has served on the Pennsylvania Commission on Sentencing and the Task Force on Death Penalty Litigation. He has secured the passage of many state laws pertaining to the safety of children and most recently conducted hearings concerning inmates serving life sentences without parole for crimes that were committed when they were juveniles. Also today is Judge Jay Blitzman, who was appointed to the Massachusetts Juvenile Court bench in June of 1996. Judge Blitzman was the founder of and first director of the Youth Advocacy Project, a community-based interdisciplinary legal services organization based in Roxbury, Massachusetts. He served as the chair of the MBA Juvenile Practice Subcommittee and has founded the newly created Juvenile Justice and Child Welfare Section. We also have Patrick Lynch of the state of Rhode Island, where he has made reducing juvenile crime the centerpiece of his administration. What is interesting about Attorney General Lynch, is that he's visited at least one school a week since taking office in 2003. During those visits, he speaks to children about making good choices in their lives. He believes that talking to kids in the classroom is much better than prosecuting them in the courtroom. We also have with us Chris Jenkins, a former social worker and currently a staff writer at the Washington Post. Mr. Jenkins has covered state and local politics, including a 3-year stint in Richmond, where he covered the administrations of Governors Mark Warner and Tim Kaine. Currently, he is the social services reporter for the Metro section of the Washington Post, where his work has touched a broad array of topics, including health care, juvenile justice, and the impact of the recent economic downturn on the working poor. And finally, from Georgetown Law Center, our own Professor Chris Henning, co-director of the Georgetown Juvenile Justice Clinic. Prior to coming to Georgetown, Professor Henning was at the D.C. Public Defender Service, where she served as lead attorney for the juvenile unit. She's written widely in the area of juvenile justice and is recognized nationally as a voice for adolescents involved in the court system. Our moderator today, star of The Daily Show, is Harvard professor and author Charles Ogletree, my good friend Charles Ogletree. Professor Ogletree founded and is the executive director of the Charles Institute for Race and Justice, and himself was a former public defender in the District of Columbia. He's also an advisor to President-elect Obama, and he said on The Daily Show that he and then he thinks he would arrive. And so today, Charles, this is your show.
Wally, thank you so much. And we are so pleased to be here at Georgetown Law Center. And one of the real giants in the juvenile justice system is Professor Wally Mlyniec. And let's thank him for hosting this wonderful event. This is a very special moment for me as well. My friend Tommy Wells talked about my co-chairing the Juvenile Justice Committee. And for many years, in the last century, I was on the criminal justice section. And I'm so happy to get the promotion to the Juvenile Justice Committee. It's a nice promotion. Today, we're going to talk about these important issues in the and for me, it's a melodramatic moment coming back here. I was just talking with some of the folks. I was the training director of the Public Defender Service in 1980 when I took the new class of attorneys to Oak Hill. And during that tour, I noticed that it was October, it was cold, and there was no heat. We noticed that mice had been in the facility. We noticed other conditions that didn't seem right. And that conversation in 1982 led to In re Geriem, which has been in in litigation for over 2 decades now. And I'm a little overwhelmed to see that there are still young men in Oak Hill. I hope they're going to tell me that life is better after we brought this litigation 25 years ago. I also wanted to thank our sponsors, particularly the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company, which is the principal sponsor. I think some of those representatives are here today. Thank you for your support to make this happen. And Hillary Clinton sent some of her staff members over here to join us today as well, and thank all the others who were part of this dialogue. You heard about this fabulous panel. We're going to get right to it. And the one thing that I have the pleasure of doing is that we're going to ask, we've got so many questions, so much to cover, that the questions must be precise and sharp, which means really get your comment out in a minute. And if you don't, I promise you I will cut you off. It's a promise that I will. We're going to cover as much ground as we can, and this is just the beginning of our work with the Juvenile Justice Committee, and we will be convening again in February in Boston, and hope that you'll hear some of the exciting work we're going to be doing there, talking about a new paradigm for juvenile justice as we look back at GALT and what GALT should mean in the 21st century. Let me get the first question. They'll be introduced by the commissioner who is overseeing these juvenile justice facilities, and we'll hear from the young men from Oak Hill after this introduction.
Hi, my name is Vinny Schiraldi. I'm the Director of Rehabilitation Services. I am the main defendant. I think there are several litigants in here on that suit. And I bring you welcome from the administration of Mayor Adrian Fenty. We are now engaged, and we're going to close Oak Hill on January 23rd, by the way. When we set the date for the ribbon cutting, you'll all be invited. And we're going to pour salt on the earth and hope another Oak Hill never grows again. These young men are involved in our positive youth development efforts, which is to build on the strengths of young people who are court involved. In so doing, for example, several of them have voted. Can you guys who voted raise your hands for the first time ever? They're over 18. 3 of you guys voted. Yeah. And part of our positive youth development efforts is to get them. And so they not only voted, but now they're going to come and speak to the new administration through this forum, and I thank you so much for doing it and so much for allowing these young people to speak. They are going to say their own names as they give their presentation. I don't want to take up any more of your time.
Great, thank you. Let's hear from the young man from Oak Hill in Maryland. We're ready. Let's turn the volume up just 1 second. Okay, go ahead.
Greetings, everyone, and thank you to the American Bar Association and Georgetown Law School for hosting today's town hall meeting and allowing us to address the new. I'm Anthony, and I'm here to represent young men at Oak Hill Youth Center, as well as youth all around the world who are dealing with troubles in the system. We are from a place of both struggle and opportunity. We are here to speak on how the system has become a lose-lose system for many young people. We are not here because we were forced to be here, but because this will get us released early. We are here hoping to make a change in the juvenile justice community. We will focus on 3 problem areas: before, during, and after youth can get into the system. Our first belief is that the system is designed for us to fail. It is too easy to do wrong and it's too hard to do right. And I quote Obama. Our second belief is that once we are in the system, we become immune to it. Too many youth become institutionalized. Our third belief is that once we are released from the system, not enough is done to help keep us out due to lack of community support.
Hello, my name is Henning. Let's take a look at some of the challenges youth face before even entering the juvenile justice system. Youth in the District of Columbia get judged by the way they dress and look and are racially profiled by police constantly. It is wrong to prejudge others because the way they may dress different. Police in D.C. harass young black males and tend to abuse their authority. They'll stop you as soon as they see you, then tell you get against the wall to search you. Then they will antagonize you and intimidate you with a lot of stereotypical questions. Even if you are clean, they will continue to harass you until they have reason to arrest you with a bogus charge like loitering. This happens to urban youth constantly across the D.C. area and throughout the United States. Protect and serve, but instead they harass and arrest.
Hello, my name is Tyrone. Now let's examine the major concerns we have about how youth are treated once in the juvenile justice system. Title 16 said that youth as young as 15 can be prosecuted as adults in Washington. We believe that ethical, cold-hearted, and ineffective. Even if found innocent, many youth are detained in D.C. jail until their trial date. There is a paradox within the system when our youth are treated as if they are guilty until proven innocent instead of innocent until proven guilty. I believe in therapeutic programs of rehabilitation. Children are still learning and should be surrounded by positive energies. Youth in adult jails are at a higher risk of being physically assaulted and not receiving education. Instead of becoming doctors and lawyers, youth tried as adults are 34% more likely to reoffend. Adults in adult jail by older, more advanced criminals. When youth are punished as adults, injustice is done, abuse takes place, and potential is snatched from our future.
Hello, my name is W.A. Youth continue to face uphill battles even after we are released from the juvenile justice system. One of the things the administration can do to help is to improve support services and programs in the community. Don't keep lecturing us. Help us get back on track with school, help us go to college, and help us better ourselves. Create mentoring programs that help adults showing young people there's another way to live life. These are the type of things we need in our community. One of the reasons many youth today are not attending these programs is because most of them are in communities where do not feel safe due to neighborhood conflicts or beefs. The same programs should be offered in each community in D.C. This is necessary to ensure youth don't return to the juvenile system.
In conclusion, the juvenile justice system is designed to keep youth incarcerated and encourage recidivism. Instead of providing us with wraparound services, both to be returned to our communities, it is our hope that we inspire you to create change in the areas that we present. We are looking for a more positive path in life. We need your help. Thank you once again. And we look forward to changes that the Obama administration will make. We would like to offer you a chance to respond or ask us any questions.
Thank you all for your wonderful comments and overview. Given the time constraints, I'll ask the panel just to start that really not to give a detailed response, but one thing that you think is important that young people should hear, and try to keep it under a minute. What's the response to the things that young people are saying about the juvenile justice system?
Well, one of the things
Blitzman?
One of the things I'd like to say at the outset, after hearing those eloquent presentations, is that the system is broken in one major respect, and that is the entry point of the system. I don't know how you gentlemen ended up in Oak Hill, but I know how a lot of kids ended up in my juvenile court session, and that's through a thing called the school-to-prison pipeline. Kids being pushed out of school and end up in the criminal justice system. In statewide figures, 3.5 times more likely to be arrested if you don't graduate high school. In our inner cities, 50% of the children who enter 9th grade do not graduate. These problems contribute dramatically to what has been characterized as a school-to-prison pipeline and disproportionate minority confinement. We do a mediocre job in the back end. It's a reactive, sanctioning-oriented system. We're not using what we should know from child psychology about constructively engaging young people in school. We're using zero tolerance inappropriately, which is inconsistent with what we know about child development, and it's also, unfortunately, the way we sometimes sanction in our juvenile court system. I don't know if any of you gentlemen had that experience, but you've certainly matured and learned a lot, and I am really, really impressed by your eloquence.
Thank you. Rhode Island Attorney General Patrick Lynch, comment, question?
Well, I know, Professor Ogletree, from Wally's introduction that you, for all of us, may be the closest connection to the new president, so we'll turn to you for all the money. But from these from these men, I think what they've shown us is, while we call this a call to action and look to the new leadership of the new president and his administration, I think they very eloquently and succinctly put how we all have to have a role in it in ourselves. And this call to action is to us, to me, which is what President Obama's been saying for many. All of us have a role in making our community better, and I dare say they do as well, and I'm proud of the young men and the voices that they have, and I wish them well.
Thank you. Professor Kristin Henning.
Yeah, let me jump in on the first gentleman.
Microphone.
Okay, yeah. The first gentleman, his number 3 problem area, re-entry into the community after a period of incarceration. So I wanted to follow up and endorse that. That is the most vulnerable area for kids that we work with, kids who are transitioning back into the community, and it's one of the weakest areas in the juvenile justice system across the country. So my recommendation would be for the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention in particular, which is responsible for identifying best practices, providing technical assistance, research and evaluation of programs, is for them to help each of the states continuum of programs that will engage the kids once they come back. Everything from after-school programs, community recreation activities, multi-systemic therapy, the full range of activities that these young people need. I also would encourage the Office of Juvenile Justice Prevention to actually engage kids in a conversation about what works in the community. I'm working with kids on a day-to-day basis who are in the system, and we hear it from the kids here at Oak Hill. They know what works. They know what's right. And so I really hope and implore the new administration to engage kids as they develop it. And then, of course, funding is the final response to that. I hope that the new administration will restore funding for juvenile justice accountability block grants and the programs that are available for reentry programs.
Thank you. Senator Stewart, Greenleaf.
Thank you. It's really impressive to hear these young men, and I think that they've covered it all. I mean, we've looked at the presentation material, and they've pretty much covered everything, so they know more than we do. And we can learn a lot from them, and they're right that the system is broken. And also that I think that the situation with punishment, I think the description of what's happened here is a description of our emphasis on punishment and not on rehabilitation. And punishment without rehabilitation is a failure. And I think it's important for us to be smart about our approach to the juvenile system, and to because it is an issue of justice, it's an issue of public safety, because these children and young men that we can salvage will be people and young people that will be able to contribute to our society and not recidivate. And, of course, it's a financial issue, and I think some of the presenters will point out the amount of money that's involved in keeping juveniles in a facility unnecessarily. So they did a great job.
Thank you, Senator Greenleaf. And finally, Christopher Jenkins, who's not only a reporter with the Washington Post, but was also a foster care caseworker, has a perspective on the ground and also as a journalist. Mr. Jenkins, your comments, reactions?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the most important things, and I'd like to sort of follow up on what Kristin said, for the activists and the advocates in the room is to help us as the media, I'll speak as a reporter, to help us understand and get us access to some of the things that these gentlemen have talked about. So in particular, the issue of recidivism and what happens to kids when they come out of the system. That's one of the things that I think we all know is an issue that we need to, as a community, needs to be more informed about. But as the media, we need to have access to children like this to be able to get stories and perspectives and all kinds of dimensions of their experience into the newspaper. So for the advocates who are in the room who work with these young men, it's important for us to work together in terms of trying to understand what the various different dimensions are of the various different experiences so that we can adequately and promptly put stories in the newspaper that get into the dimensions of why things may not be connected adequately as they should be. So that would be my first observation about what these guys have said.
Well, thank you very much. I also want to tell Mr. Schiraldi that we're very excited about these young men, and I hope they all have some notebooks and paper there to take notes, and that they will give us their ideas and suggestions about what we can do as they listen through the course of the day. And Mr. Schiraldi will get that to us so we can not only hear what they just raised, but react to some of these things from the actual constituents, the people who are involved in this. And I will make sure that the first point I tell President Obama is that we need money. I'll tell him some other things, but I'll make sure I don't forget we need money and make these things most cost effective. Now we're going to hear questions from the people who are designed to give a question or a comment. I want to first thank the firm of DLA Piper, of Skadden Arps, Perkins Coie, of Gibson Dunn and Crutcher, of Holland, and the Georgetown Lawson and Juvenile Justice Clinic for being our sponsors. And our co-sponsors include the National Legal Aid and Defender Association, Children's Defense Fund, National Criminal Justice Association, the National Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, ABA Standing Committee on Substance Abuse, the ABA Standing Committee on Legal Aid and Indigent Defendants, ABA Center on Children and Law, the ABA Public Education Division, and the ABA Commission on Youth at Risk. All of them are helping make this event a event of success. We're very appreciative. First comment.
Good afternoon, Professor Ogletree and distinguished members of the panel. First thing I want to point out, gentlemen, what a rough act to follow. My name is Larry Wojcik. I'm a trial partner in the Chicago office at DLA Piper. We're also, coming from Chicago, very, very proud to be the home of the president-elect. There's such a great ring to it. But we engaged in a 3-year project of representing juveniles. And a part of that project was not only courtroom work, it was getting them back in the classroom. And I'd like to address at least my comments and questions in that area. The first issue we found that because of competing agendas and very skewed funding incentives and disincentives, there was a total disconnect between the 3 constituencies responsible for getting a child back to school, that being the courts, the probation department, and the Chicago Public Schools. We found children who couldn't get back in school because they had not been released. They didn't have a piece of paper that said they had been released from the detention center, although they were standing in front of the principal and there was no warrant out for their arrest. So one issue I'd like to set up for the panel is what could the administration do? Skewed way of funding. Okay? It starts with perhaps No Child Left Behind, where principals are unduly concerned about the student count and what funding they get and what grade level they get. But as an offshoot, we found another troubling trend, that just at a time when our country was bailing out financial institutions this September and October, the labor statistics reports came out for the summer. They pointed out that 2 out of every 3 teenagers could not get a job. And that was for all teenagers. For Hispanics, it was 3 out of 4. For African Americans, 4 out of 5. So what fills the void without a job? So my question to the panel is, how can the administration induce the business sector to become part of the solution? These are not only future citizens, these are future employees and future consumers. It seems that the business sector should be invited to the table when we talk about a holistic community to juvenile justice issues.
Thank you. Quick comment, Judge Blitzman.
Well, first, I just want to say I should have said this at the outset. Although I got up at 4:30 in the morning to catch a 7 o'clock flight, I am truly energized and privileged to be in this room, seeing so many people, whom actually many of whom I've known over the years, whom I regard as colleagues and mentors. So, thank you for the opportunity. Great question. And I think the question goes to the heart of why I was so eager to participate. Although I'm a judge, I think enough of us do not participate in the larger discussions that inform the work, the systemic discussions. And I think we've got to step back and look at the global implications of what we're doing. School-to-prison pipeline, which I mentioned before and which I think is implicated by the question, is at the heart of this. And there are models around the country that show some signs. For example, Jeffrey Canada, the 97 Block initiative in Harlem, it talks about enlisting the business community, tutoring, mentoring, and following kids, not only in terms of school retention, but following them through college to make sure that they don't slip back. The dimensions of this problem are profound, and we've got to front-end resources. The senator talked about being smart. It's not enough to be. It's more important to be smart on crime rather than tough on crime. What we're doing is not effective from a cost-benefit analysis, and it's compromising public safety. Your research shows what the national research shows, that children who do not graduate high school are 3.5 times more likely to be arrested. 70% of those kids end up in state prison. 70% of the kids in state prison do not have high school diplomas. Studies have shown that in the 100 largest cities in America, 58% of the children who enter 9th grade do not graduate. School drop. If you go to a school. Let's look at the kids who entered senior year and the number that graduated. That number is apocryphal. That's sort of like cooking the books. You have to look at who entered 9th grade and who's left standing at the end. And the problem is really profound. We talk about evidence-based decision-making in juvenile justice.
20 seconds.
We know enough. We know enough now to know there's a palpable connection between these kids who are leaving school and the kids who end up in our system in terms of DMC issues. The numbers are corresponding, and the racial disparities in both systems are alarmingly similar, and a cause of incredibly great concern. And I think we're creating an underclass unless we get on top of this problem. We know that treating kids in the community and home is infinitely more cost-effective and better enhances public safety. Keeping kids in school is probably an important first step in that regard.
Quick comment, and then the next question.
Yeah, let me offer 3 very quick solutions. One, with regard to engaging the business, I would strongly recommend community-wide education on the fundamental differences between juveniles and adults. Namely, that juveniles, the science is clear now that juveniles are amenable to treatment. And I think the fear in the community is that, once bad, all bad, and there's nothing that can be done. And I think if the business community understood better that these children can respond to treatment if they're engaged in meaningful work and the like, then they'll be better off. The second thing is related to that quickly. I would love to see statutory prohibitions that preclude states from, that preclude public school systems from excluding kids from school if they have to have a criminal record. And I think finally related to that, related to your comment, is this notion of improving confidentiality so that children have the ability to go out and get jobs without the stigma and the mark of a juvenile record. So what's the point of having a separate juvenile system if you're going to have all the collateral consequences of adult conviction?
Senator Greenleaf?
Just very quickly, I think the answer to why we have a revolving door in both our adult system and our juvenile system is very clear if you put it with what these speakers indicated. In adults, they go in without education, they come out without education. In juveniles, it's even worse. They go from an educational institution, and they come out, and they can't get an education. They go in with an addiction, they come out with addiction. They go in without a job and vocational training, they come out without vocational training, and they come out with a prison record, a felony record. And just any one of those would be an obstacle to any of us in attaining integration into society. You add all those together, and are we surprised that they come back? Are we surprised that they recidivate? Are we surprised that they turn to because that's all they know? That's all they can be successful in. That's all they can earn a living, basically. So that's why rehabilitation and restorative justice is so important, so that they have some support system, and we're not providing that now.
Great. Next question or comment?
Good afternoon. I'm Cornelia McDonald. I'm an author and a dramatist. And I'm honored to have the opportunity to share my thoughts regarding this pandemic. I want to ask this question. How are we going to collaborate to create cohesion and consistency in the delivery of services, and ongoing high-quality services delivered in a holistic manner? Second, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to imagine a 10-year-old who cannot read nor write, no father to speak of, an addicted mother, and he's raising 4 siblings. This 10-year-old, the father figure of the family, trying to protect his family from an abusive boyfriend and keep his head and go to school every day. This kid spent 18 months in a program that I had, but at school he was very disruptive. And he said to me, "Why are you bothering me? My life don't count." This man-child is time. His mother called me 3 weeks ago. I want you to open your eyes. I want to ask you, what will you tell his mother? What will you tell Tario? Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Comment, response?
I would just say if we were honest, if we were going to tell them the truth, we would say we'd failed them to a large extent, but we're going to try to pick it up as a team. I think in some ways it goes back to the gentlemen that were on the screen earlier, and I'll kind of tie the last couple things together, because it goes to, I think, the last question. In DLA, if that's the name of that company, I read it on the way down, they gave 23,000 hours, pro bono hours, was my understanding when I read that. That's an example of good corporate citizens stepping up, and when you tie that in with other efforts, you're going to end up with this. The only thing that I'm sure we'll focus on in other questions is, as much as we have a responsibility with the proper way and make sure the right standards are there and team support, we're failing them at the outset, not educating them appropriately as they come into the system. And I know a lot of you in this crowd are making efforts at younger ages to make sure they're informed, educated, and prepared so they don't end up in that cell.
Could I make a quick comment?
Yes.
Just quickly, I think the question was a very provocative one about the systems or the lack of a system. We use the phrase juvenile justice system, but in some degree that's an oxymoron. We have a lot of fragmentation. It seems to me that irrespective of the point of entry, a child who deserves and needs mental health services should get mental health services. A child who has a special education entitlement should get special education. There should be cost sharing across agencies. Secondly, I think we've been talking a lot about the school right now and reentry, and that's a problem. But I don't want to give the court a pass either. We talk about in re Gault all the time in law school, and I think we judges and juvenile court practitioners should reread that case periodically, because my fear is that we're making some bail decisions at the front end which are not related to court appearance. We shouldn't be sending kids to jail if they're not attending school. We should be making sure schools are filing truancy petitions. We shouldn't be recriminalizing the conduct that was decriminalized after 1967. And we're talking about an era, by the way, in which juvenile crime has declined dramatically, while detention numbers have soared as we've recriminalized status offense conduct. It's a huge, huge problem as we go forward in the next 100 days and hopefully the next 8 years.
Great. Thank you. And the next question's from one of my favorite former students, Will Gunn.
Thank you, Professor. I'm Will Gunn. I chair the ABA Commission on Youth at Risk, and Judge Blitzman has just provided me with a perfect segue in terms of what I'd like to touch on. The Commission on Youth at Risk has been focusing a great deal of attention since 2006 on status offenders. For those who may be unfamiliar with the term, a status offender is a juvenile whose conduct would not be criminal but for that person's age. We're talking about offenses such as truancy. We're talking about an individual that may be a runaway or an incorrigible youth who's having difficulty in dealing with their parents, or perhaps who may be in possession of alcohol. The ABA Commission on Youth at Risk has engaged in a variety of activities connected with this particular topic. We've had a national OJJDP video conference viewed by over 7,000 people. We've developed a new book on reforming the process. I have a copy of the book with me, and we have order forms. The book is called Families in Need of Critical Assistance, Legislation and Policy Aiding Youth Who Engage in Non-Criminal Misbehavior. Order forms are available in the back. In addition to that, we've also gone forward with creating a new policy statement for the ABA dealing with this critical issue. Now, we take the position that basically these youth should not be in the juvenile justice system at all. We need to place investment on the front end in prevention as opposed to putting these youth in a situation where they are in a criminal justice system as opposed to a prevention-related system. With respect to that, there has been an ABA policy on this issue actually since 1992, which calls for a prohibition on secure confinement of status offenders, but we need to have that implemented by all the states. Finally, we want to make sure that we end the exception of by juvenile courts of the valid court order provision of the Federal Juvenile Justice Act. My question is basically this for the panel. How, as advocates and as practitioners, can we move forward on this issue so that we don't create a permanent underclass of youth who, by virtue of their status offense behavior?
And before others answer, I was going to ask Mr. Jenkins first as a journalist, when you see the headlines about crime and delinquency, does the public even know there's a distinction between a status offender and someone who committed a homicide? Is there a sense that every child is grouped together because they're incarcerated?
I think that's an excellent question. Probably no. I think particularly when it comes to juveniles, I don't think we probably do a good enough job distinguishing between the kinds of different, obviously people know about felonies or misdemeanors, but status offenses obviously are a different group where, trying to explain those sorts of things, many reporters may not even know the difference themselves. So I think to some degree you're right. We need to do a better job in distinguishing between both adults and the status offense issues. As many people I'm sure know, many of the prisoners who come back into across the country are coming in because of status offenses, not because of new crimes, or at least that's one of the reasons why many of the in the population. So that is something that we, I think, generally speaking, need to do better on in terms of trying to explain what is really going on and sort of the policy issues and why people are coming back into prison. When it comes to juveniles, though, I think the gentleman's question more directly, and from a reporter's perspective, I don't know what kinds of relationships you've established with media outlets in your area, but again, faces to the issues are the most important thing for us. And I don't think it's not rocket science, but I think sometimes it's not as well perceived by advocates and activists how powerful the face can be that's directly connected to a policy issue. In Virginia, for instance, a couple of years ago, there was an issue of this school prison pipeline. The state had not done a particularly good job in trying to get children coming out of juvenile prisons into school. Kids were floating around all over the state trying to figure out where they were supposed to go after they'd gotten out. A few stories later, some real-life examples, the Board of Education looked up and realized that they had, for 2 years, essentially just screwing the entire matter up. And I think it was the face, the parents, the children who came to a board meeting and then, putting a face in front of the camera that was able to make that happen in a real way. So it sounds sometimes a little Pollyannish, but at the same time, it can make a difference, I think, if you really want the reporters to at least establish relationships with them, have an opportunity to bring a person in front of them to explain the issue, you can get some results.
All right. Judge Blitzman?
Yeah, here's the scope of the problem. This is such a right-on question. In 2004, 18% of all arrests in the United States were for status offenders. 100,000 kids. Now, how could that be if we decriminalized status offense cases after Galt and in 1974 with the enactment of the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act and all the state status offense statutes that ensued? Well, what happened was the enactment was amended to allow for what's called the valid court order, which allows these cases to be treated as probation surrenders. So in a second offense, so to speak, a child violates a court order, it's treated as a probation violation. 30 states have gone this route now that are before Congress to take this VCO out. We could debate this, and I've debated with some of my judicial colleagues, the frustration that judges have about not having places to send kids. Danger is going back to that pre-Galt era. You know, Galt is an amazing case. It says right in the beginning of the case that the excesses of the Star Chamber were a trifle in comparison to those of our juvenile court. Sounds hyperbolic comparing the juvenile court to the prosecutorial arm of the Inquisition, but the harm that we visited upon kids in the name of treatment, fixing and assessing prior to adjudication was palpable. And quite frankly, as Judge Brennan said in the famous Kent, kids were getting the worst of both possible worlds anyhow. They weren't getting great treatment, and they sure weren't getting due process. So along comes Galt. And I'm really afraid that we go back that route. And again, I've already expressed my concern about this process of holding kids for status offense kind of conduct when they're accused of delinquency acts. I think it compromises what bail is about. We've got to find a better systemic way to deal with this collective frustration. And I think the solutions, hopefully, that we'll be talking about today are the right ones. Kids, by the way, nationally are there an average of 15 to 20 days. 40% of the kids are there for misdemeanor offenses. Alarming numbers are there ages 14 and younger, 15 and younger. And the status offense issue particularly affects adolescent females, whom we tend to hold longer in the name of finding services that don't exist, and creates this pernicious cycle. Kids held for that long, there's a 40% chance they don't go back to school. They don't go back to school, and where are we? They get arrested, and it's public safety. So we also have to recast the discussion so that policymakers and legislators understand the global implications of what we're doing. Well-intended, but not working. We've got to engage the schools and the courts and sit down together and talk about these cases outside of the polarized context of courtrooms, perhaps in a much more comprehensive manner than we've done heretofore.
Great. Thank you. Next question.
Good afternoon. My name is Lakitria Felder, and I'm with Holland & Knight here in D.C. Holland & Knight has a full-time community services team that provides pro bono legal services. As a pro bono fellow and now litigation associate at Holland & Knight, along with the Juvenile Justice Project of Louisiana, we brought a Section 1983 class action in New Orleans on behalf of children detained in their pretrial detention facility called the Youth Study Center. In addition to the unconstitutional of confinement, we also brought claims based on the lack of educational services that were provided to these kids while they're in detention. An example of the school at the Youth Study Center, the kids are allowed out of their cells for maybe 2 hours to complete worksheets that are not targeted to their grade level or to their age at all. This is what the Youth Study Center considers school when these children are confined. My question is, what can we do, or what can the administration do in order to ensure that these children are given access to meaningful education while they're detained, especially for children who have special needs, who often have individual education plans that are not being complied with?
Who wants to respond?
I totally agree with everything you've said. What has to be done is we have to educate these kids whom we're detaining, especially if we're detaining kids who are not going to school, which, again, question the propriety of that, and then not educate them while they're in detention. It seems like cruel and unusual punishment because it exacerbates the problem. And again, the longer kids are in, the less likely they are to return and get that education. We also have to look at conditions of confinement. One of the issues that your question makes me think of is this whole inability of juveniles to really seek redress once they're confined. Galt only addressed what we call fundamental fairness, right to counsel during the adjudicatory hearing. It doesn't address issues of detention. It doesn't address dispositional issues. Kids don't have access to attorneys. There's an emerging civil Gideon movement which talks about these kinds of issues, getting access so kids can challenge these issues. at the whole utility of large-scale institutions. Warehousing kids is what happens. We know from recidivism studies that what works for kids are smaller, if we have to lock kids up, in smaller units. You look at recidivism studies. Their reported recidivism rate is so low. I think they're cooking the books, but they got a reported recidivism rate of 7%. You know, the national average is over 50%. California, which had large scale institutions, I think was hovering around 70% until litigation went into question, attacked that condition of confinement. So it's more than just what services we give to kids once they're inside. The environment. We built these large-scale facilities assuming that crime was going to soar. Guess what? Crime didn't soar. It declined dramatically by 30%. We were left with all this legislation, and it was sort of like this perverse field of dreams, you know. Build them and we will fill them. And that's what's happened.
Yeah.
Attorney General Patrick Lynch.
Let me give quick context from my perspective as well. I'm not only the Attorney General, but I'm the district attorney in my jurisdiction. It's a little silly trivia for you, and I'm a former line prosecutor. But to the point, to the question, I would just say I agree wholeheartedly. And just to add one other point, I think to the judge, agreeing with him, thing that has to happen, in my estimation, because of the higher rate of mental health issues with people that are young people who are incarcerated, substance abuse, either alcohol or drugs, and that kind of ties into the status issue, particularly alcohol issues, I think. Before we throw the books to them, after we throw the books at them, we should be assessing them properly so that we give them a shot instead of just feeling good about trying to give them a shot at education. And in that's an important part of the process, in my estimation.
Yeah. And let me just add a quick point about conditions of confinement. I want to sort of give a nod to best practices, in particular the Center for Children's Law and Policy. I see Dana Schoenberg, and I imagine Mark Soler is here, but they are committed to evaluating and adopting standards for conditions across the board, and it includes education as just one of the many components of it. I also want to commend, again, in terms of best practices, Vinny Schiraldi, who has been open and transparent here in the District of Columbia in allowing for the development of an oversight panel made up of members of the community who come in at periodic intervals, unannounced, to the detention facilities to review and determine whether the standards are in fact being met across the board. And so if there could be some federal mandate that detention facilities, all incarceration facilities across the country, have to have some sort of periodic oversight, I would encourage that.
It would also be great, by the way, it would also be great if court personnel, including judges, actually visited the facilities that we're sending these kids to. Yeah. That might have an effect.
Let me also say that these comments are terrific because they're not just further elucidating the problem, but concrete ways of reform. And I hope it will not just be what's in place, but some possible things that should be in place to think about some other approaches that might help resolve some problems. Next question or comment?
Thank you very much. My name is David Marsden. I'm a member of the Virginia House of Delegates and former juvenile justice director in the state of Virginia. And I have sort of a back-to-basics message that in my work that I do now, consulting around the country in facilities for secure confinement, finding that many places don't have minimum operating standards. When they do, they haven't woven them into their operating manuals and their procedural manuals. Very often there is absolutely no audits of the standards as to whether these facilities are living up to them, so the staffs don't take them seriously. This is pretty consistent in a lot of localities around the country, especially in juvenile detention centers. And finally, what we need for these folks is requirements as we reauthorize the JJDP Act to require some kinds of minimum standards that are approved at the state level, that we have audits, and that people are trained. The folks I go out and I speak with have never heard of the JJDP Act, couldn't tell you what the core requirements are, and just don't know. And it's like painting a house. Until you prepare the surface, all the good things that are being talked about here today, the good programs and the good practices, they're not going to stick because these folks just haven't been made aware of what it is they need to know to operate good facilities for children. And so my message is it possible for the administration to start that foundation so that we can build in this country as opposed to trying to push programs down on facilities when they're not prepared to handle them.
Great point. I don't know if I want to respond to it.
I think it's a fantastic point, which goes to the heart of conditions of confinement. You know, as regards the the presentation at the beginning, before coming down here, I was talking to Professor Ogletree about my early experiences as a defender. It was on a conditions of confinement lawsuit in Massachusetts in 1975. That facility, by the way, is still open. You know, they still haven't closed it. They still haven't closed it. It's 33 years later. That facility is still open. So these are huge.
Golf facility in Arizona, right?
And so was the golf facility. If you went to Arizona, the training school that golf could go to. He was sentenced to 6 years in an industrial training school for making adolescent comments of the indecent variety, and we never even knew if he made the statements because there was no trial. The judge was the inquisitor, and there was no record. So this is obviously an issue of some significance. We need standards. We need guidelines. We also have to beef up the JJDPA because the JJDPA does not address several important issues. It talks, for example, about addressing DMC, disproportionate minority confinement. But what does address really mean? It also doesn't address conditions of confinement as regards what exactly is meant by that. And we should expand its ambit to preclude commingling, using Roper versus Simmons, the death penalty case, of juveniles and adults in any facility, whether it's juvenile or adult. These are all issues that I think can be and should be amended in the JJDPA, which historically have not been addressed.
Okay, next comment.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tara Andrews. I'm Deputy Executive Director of the Coalition for Juvenile Justice, and I'd like to use my time to address and to ask that President-elect Obama make it a priority to resource the only federal home for juvenile justice within federal government, which is the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. Without the leadership in a well-resourced office within the federal government, all of the reforms that we're talking about are going to be sporadic as opposed. Unfortunately, what we've seen over in recent years is a decimation of OJJDP. Used to be the home for research and training and technical assistance and evaluation of helping folks identify best practices and help states replicate those best practices across the nation. However, we've also seen OJJDP's own operational budget go from $6.7 million in 2002 to $700,000 in 2000. And do its job and do what it was designed to do. The Coalition for Juvenile Justice, and I bring you greetings on behalf of our 1,500 members. Our members are those of the state advisory groups on juvenile justice that are chartered and under the JJDPA, Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, and are charged with implementing the JJDPA at the state level. If you get your hands on the book, because I'm not going to read our statement, but on pages 112 through 118, our members, with the leadership of our national chair, Dr. Robin Jenkins, who's also chair of the North Carolina State Advisory Group, we have put together a memo that puts forth our recommendations in terms of who the next administrator should be, in terms of qualifications and focus, and what we believe the priorities of the office should be during the first term. And so we hope that you have the opportunity to look through that. Thank you.
Thank you. And let me respond for some other responses as well to not just you but others in terms of addressing this issue to President-elect Obama. And you should also know that you have a friend in First Lady Michelle Obama. When she was at Harvard Law School, she's at the Legal Aid Bureau. So she did work with families and children as a law student and has a special affinity there and will be a First Lady who will be concerned about children and families. And so I hope that you'll think, and don't tell them I told you this, about not only the financial needs, but what are the cost savings that are accompanied by the financial needs. That is, that this is how we save money, so it's not another way to spend to save taxpayer money by doing creative things up front that will reduce the cost, and to have this OJJDP as a flagship in the 21st century that shows that it's not creating problems but really solving problems by using resources and creating incentives. So I hope there will be a coordinated, not 1,000 emails, but the whole idea of people figuring out there's a comprehensive proposal as to how to address the issues of children. And keep in mind, it's not just 4 years or 8 years. That is, something that becomes institutionalized, so it's not term limited based on when you serve, but something that becomes so fundamental, becomes such an important part of the process that it will live beyond the occupancy of the White House or even the tenure of some members of Congress as part of the goal.
This issue of front-ending, there are some models that show some real promise. For example, New York City Juvenile Corrections, I read an article by Leslie Kaufman in February of this year called Home Remedies, which talks about in juvenile corrections, what they're doing is they're going away from locked large facilities, going to a model of deinstitutionalization. Vinny? Jerome Miller's in the house, in which it's been shown already community-based therapies, including multi-systemic therapy in the home, day reporting. The early signs are that it's reducing recidivism. Because kids aren't being warehoused. They're actually being treated in the community where they have access to school and community resources. And it costs about $17,000 per year with these wraparound services, as opposed to in New York City, $140,000 to $170,000 per year to incarcerate. One of the submissions that I read talks about over the course of a life, if you could avoid of a kid's life, if you could avoid unnecessary detention and incarceration, the cost savings are $2.2 million, which seems kind of high, but that's staggering. And also, you address the issues that I think that we're all talking about, the dangers that are endemic. And you touched on mental health. That's one of the biggest issues in juvenile justice, and we all can attest anecdotally from our experiences about how youth authorities around the country have become de facto mental health service providers, very, very inappropriately so. Fox Butterfield has written eloquently about this issue, as have many others. So there are models out there that we can replicate.
Professor Henning?
Yeah, I just really wanted to go back to that last comment about OJJDP and the organizational structure, because I really don't want it to get lost. And if I could make one comment to the administration, it would be that the overarching theme for the administration should be that juvenile justice cannot be a subsidiary, a subcommittee, a subpart of juvenile justice issues. And that theme should guide every aspect of the development of OJDP. All the way from the leadership through the organizational structure, all the way down to the development of policy with regard to leadership. I would love to see an administrator of that agency selected who does not hail from a criminal justice background, doesn't hail from a law enforcement background, doesn't draw upon a corrections experience, but instead comes to the office with a background and understanding of adolescent development, child welfare.
I think we need a cabinet position. A cabinet position which should look at all these systemic connections, including the connections between kids and our child welfare system. One of the issues that the Children's Defense Fund, has so passionately championed, and our juvenile justice system. To see these cross-system connections.
I totally agree with that, and I would go further and to add with regard to sort of the organizational structure, whether it's cabinet or something else. The OJJDP has to stand as an independent, fully funded, fully staffed agency with full capacity to do to achieve all of its core mission. So those are just the comments that I just didn't want to let go by, because I really I thought her comments were dead on.
Great. Next question, comment.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Tim Bryceland Betts. I'm with CWLA, and I'm a member of the Task Force on Appropriation and Delinquency Prevention Coalition. So I'm here to talk about the dollars, the federal dollars, and I was glad to hear the comments earlier about this. I mean, obviously, this is a critical component of a federal national juvenile justice strategy. The information in the booklet is well done and very succinct. I just wanted to highlight a few key points. And again, this is an area of budget cuts that has been that's been devastating. We've heard from states and local juvenile justice professionals that they have had debilitating cuts in federal support. State after state is just even considering how few dollars there are from the feds for juvenile justice, wondering how the heck they're going to be able to to maintain this, and even in some cases considering simply withdrawing from the federal system and complying with the core requirements, which is tied to the federal dollars. So that's a serious issue. And for example, there is one of the primary funding streams is the Juvenile Accountability Block Grant. In 2002, and during the last reauthorization of the JJDPA, we were pleased that this particular program was enhanced and improved, and legislative language was added, particularly in the areas around intervention and on mental health and substance abuse services were added as allowable expenses to Juvenile Accountability Block Grant, and it was funded at $250 million a year. But what happened was funding has been slashed, and in the last few years is only receiving $50 million a year for the whole country. So obviously that's a serious concern. So what we're asking in the near term is that we, at the very least, restore funding to the levels at the end of the last administration. That would be a worthy goal here in the near term, is to get the funding levels back to $250 million for the Accountability Block Grant and to the levels that we had at the end of the last administration for the other accounts. And then beyond that, in the current reauthorization of the JJDPA, we, as our and many others, are advocating increased funding beyond those levels, which obviously, as you're hearing here this afternoon, is very much needed. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Any comments? Yes.
I just want to point out, the gentleman's comments made me think that, just again, for the advocates and those who run small organizations, community-based organizations, or even some of the national ones, this is the time, again, to work relationships on the ground level with your small town or your regional reporters. Budget cuts, all the things that we know are happening both on the federal, local, and that social service agencies and places like yourself likely will feel the hurt, and well, not likely will, fortunately. And it is an opportunity for us as reporters to get an opportunity to show what these impacts are. What are the impacts of what everybody's been feeling on both, again, at the national, state, and local level. And so now is the time for folks who work on the local level to work out and work with any social service reporter you have, juvenile justice reporter you have, government reporters that you have, to point out what exactly is going on to community-based budgets, to state budgets, to local budgets, to help, again, inform us about how we can illustrate what's happening.
Could I make a suggestion to the reporter? Sure. I would welcome you to come to a juvenile session. I know there are concerns about confidentiality, but opening up the court is a whole other debate.
Very much so.
But to really see and dramatize while preserving confidentiality, but not using names, some of the horrific situations kids in sort of systemic morass, and maybe that would be another way for you to get the word out.
Thank you.
We could do that, I think.
But in the meantime, in terms of media, constructing your arguments and your pitches to reporters and to the media, use this time that everyone knows is a time of budget cutting for everybody to get your dig in, and an opportunity to say, this is what's happening in my world, in my community, in this issue.
Thank you. Next comment.
Good afternoon. I'm Carol Chodroff, the Advocacy Director of Human Rights Watch U.S. program, and previously I was a federal public defender where I represented kids who were victims of the over-federalization of state and local crime. And before that, I was a high school teacher for kids in the juvenile justice system, where I saw exactly what Professor Henning referred to, that our kids to rehabilitation and prevention, we have to invest in them. I serve as co-chair of the National Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Gang Task Force, and we have worked hard on the issue of federal gang policy. And it's an incredibly exciting moment right now in our history where we have the opportunity for meaningful change for our kids and to promote promising policies that we know will work, rather than to continue what we have been doing for too many years, which is pursuing flawed policies when we address gangs and gang crime that leads to the over-incarceration of our nation's youth, tremendous and staggering racial and ethnic disparity, and what's stunningly expensive. We bear in this country the dubious distinction of being the world's leading incarcerator, with 2.2 million people at this moment incarcerated in our jails and prisons. And African American men bear the brunt of these incarceration rates. They're incarcerated at a rate that's 6 times more nationally than white men. And in many states and in many facilities, in many of our juvenile facilities, that rate is much, much worse. We don't dispute that actual violence requires enforcement, but what we have done is we have pursued, rather than pursuing what works, the prevention and the early intervention and the actual causes of gang violence, we have been focusing our efforts and our energies on the tail end, which is the incarceration, and it is time for that to stop. Professor Ogletree and the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice released a terrific report, No More Children Left Behind Bars, in which they conclude that incarceration is a stunningly, let me get the quote right, a spectacularly unsuccessful treatment. The good news is we know what does work. We know that locking up our kids in facilities can actually strengthen gang affiliation. But on the flip side, when we invest in prevention and intervention, we can stop the crime from occurring before it ever starts. We have competing federal approaches. There's one approach known as the Gang Abatement Act. It did pass out of the Senate. This approach we've strongly opposed. The National Juvenile Justice Coalition has opposed, and it's been blocked in the House. 8 members, 6 from the Congressional Black Caucus, have formally withdrawn support from this bill because of the disparate have on communities of color. What this legislation will do, and what we urge President-elect Obama not to sign this type of legislation that's overly punitive. It will increase incarceration rates. It will increase rates of juvenile life without parole, and we are the only nation in the world that imposes that penalty of life in prison, or sentencing children to die in prison. And it will widen the racial and ethnic disparity by broadening the definition of gang and gang crime that will lead to more unwarranted federal prosecution of youth, and particularly of low-income youth and youth of color. It also will invest more resources in incarceration. The good news is we know it works, and we have a countervailing approach known as the Youth Promise Act, which we heard referred to earlier on. We urge the new administration to work together with Congress to support this. In essence, and I'll be brief, what it does is it invests in state and local communities and tribes to say, okay, let's get all the stakeholders together, including the youth, to assess what the needs are. And to focus on prevention and intervention, and all the cost savings that will be sustained by the lowered prison rates will then be reinvested in prevention programs. My question to the panelists is, what programs have you seen in your communities, in your positions, that are supportive of these prevention efforts and that make sense that we could recommend to the new administration to promote?
And very quick responses. Anyone want to respond?
There's one that comes to mind that I'm aware of. It's a Clayton County initiative south of Atlanta, Georgia, predominantly African-American community. They were concerned about school diversion, because in the aftermath of Columbine, the number of their school-based referrals rose by astronomically, like by 1,000, as zero-tolerance policies, which were initially designed to combat guns and drugs in schools, have been expanded to address all conduct, which is is inconsistent with what we know from the MacArthur Foundation Adolescent Research Network work and guess what, are not little adults. But that's the reality. So they came together and they formed a coalition, a collaborative involving the school superintendent, the chief of police, juvenile justice, including court, DA, public defender, and they came up with a based alternative to criminalizing these cases. It shows it's reduced detention by over 50%, and it's reduced DMC by 57%. An example of how bad DMC can get with these school-based referrals: Springfield, Massachusetts. 83% of the kids in the schools primarily Hispanic. 40% of the cases in the Springfield Juvenile Court are school-based referrals and arrest. In Holyoke, it's 79 and 25. We've got to do business differently because that's the pipeline. So that's one great example. And I think I mentioned the other one about working in the community with wraparound services, which are much more cost-effective than incarcerating. Incarceration is appropriate, but we've got to use it at the back end for selected kids as opposed to one size fits all. It's inconsistent with what we know about individualized treatment, which is supposed to be, one of the hallmarks of juvenile justice. And we also know that categorically transferring kids and putting them into the adult system to large facilities, those states that do that, guess what, have the highest recidivism rates. So from a public safety point of view, it just does not work, and it's endangering us all, as well as the futures of these kids and families.
Yes.
Can I very quickly we've mentioned the word multi-systemic therapy. I think this is a perfect time to at least throw it out in a very concrete way, instead of talking about concrete examples, which I actually do think is a good idea. But we should also broad strokes models that are research-driven, proven to be effective, that can be replicated across the country. In multi-systemic therapy, they use research. Imagine that. But multi-systemic therapy, family functional therapy, and multi-dimensional treatment foster care are three programs that are proven to work and be replicated across the country. I practice in a jurisdiction where at least one of them, multi-systemic therapy, two. I've had an opportunity to work with all three. There we go. I've had opportunity with my kids to work with multi-systemic therapy, and by far, programs that my kids are involved in, MST works the best to get them back on track. So I would endorse models that can be replicated.
Another good one is Positive Behavioral Intervention System, PBIS, which is used in schools. It's a different way. It's a strength-based way of engaging kids in schools, which is not reactive. Because guess what? A lot of the kids we have are oppositional, and if you're oppositional with an oppositional kid, or oppositional related to, revisiting zero tolerance and applying it only in the situations where it's appropriate. Zero tolerance makes sense if you're going to have a reaction to misbehavior, but when the reaction is not proportionate, you got intolerance.
Patrick?
When I came into office, I tied in with something that was referred to as the Institute for Study and Practice of Nonviolence, and what we had done is actually taken down from Boston a program they referred to as street workers, not street walkers, street workers, and they are basically a supplemental force out there with law enforcement, and so that's one example, but it really goes to the question of how we have to tie in a network of people, and I think it goes back to those young men on television, and in no way do I mean to criticize them for the phrases they use, but I will go back to what they use. And I really want to credit them for being so honest with it. Remember that they said about the police, bogus charges, antagonistic, trumped up, bullying them. There were a few others that they threw out. And again, I praise them for their honesty, and I think it's true and accurate in many ways. But I think as a district attorney, chief law enforcement officer, to defend men and women in uniform who on the vast majority are out there doing their jobs and doing it very well for us, the fact that they are that way, and I'm agreeing with those young men, the fact that there are officers there, it's largely a frustration that is borne out because they're being left alone on the street, and we've been stripped over time with the depletion of funds to wonderful programs to build in this network, whatever programs they might be. And I think that goes partly back to the funding we need to get that network up and running, and then a community spirit behind it.
It's interesting. Community relations, diversion programs are all the first to go in budget cuts. Things to deinstitutionalize young people. Our report was mentioned. The No More Children Left Behind bars can be found on our website. It's charleshamiltonhouston.org, and the report's called No More Children Left Behind Bars. All right, next comment question. Ellen?
Ellen Maris, from co-director of the Center for Children Law and Policy at the University of Houston Law Center. And my concern is twofold. One is prevention, which we've talked about a bit. But the studies have shown that when people are involved with the system, when they don't feel disenfranchised, when they have a voice, that they don't tend to break the laws of society. And so what I want to know is some of your recommendations of what the new administration can do to follow through has been about, giving a voice to the disenfranchised, getting young people involved, and how can we do that so we can prevent children from coming into the system from the very beginning.
All right, who wants to comment?
Well, that's a huge one. I think it's got to start with we talk about resources. Sure, resources are important, but how we allocate limited resources is going to become increasingly important in this era of fiscal austerity. So I think we've got to start in terms of front ending. We're talking about Head Start. We're talking about school retention. We're talking about tutoring to teach kids to read. Here's an example. Here's an idea that I've had that I've been trying to get off the ground in Lowell. Hasn't worked yet. Why not use local colleges, local universities, go to their schools of education and say, hey, get internships, externships, work study to tutor kids. Mentoring is important, but I think, teaching kids to read, is crucial. That's an idea that, to me, is cost effective because it costs nothing. It just costs, it just takes the political will of a school administrator to sit down with somebody. There's an organization, is Fight Crime, Invest in Kids going to be presenting? Good. I don't want to steal your thunder because I'm dying to hear that one. Okay.
Next comment.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for your attention and dedication. This is a wonderful convening. I'm Nancy Gannon-Hornberger. I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition for Juvenile Justice, but I'm wearing another hat at the moment, which is I'm here as the representative of the Act for Juvenile Justice campaign, which is a campaign to reauthorize, but also to take this grand opportunity to improve the JJDPA, the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, which I think everyone in the room is familiar with. I'm also representing a very broad-based and diverse coalition of more than 350 organizations, many of whom, I dare say, all of whom are in the room here. Our first message is fairly obvious, but it is a grand opportunity to improve the Act, but there's also a pressing need to move it forward ASAP. So although that's an obvious point, I really wanted to get across that the reauthorization was due in 2007. There's been a lot of good dialogue, evaluation of best practice, of research, of budget constraints, of the needs of court-involved youth and their families. Tremendous amount of wisdom has been brought to bear to inform the reauthorization, and it's time to move it. So that's my first message. Second message is embodied by a statement of principles that I know you have in your packet that's been, as I mentioned, signed by more than 350 organizations, international, national, state, and local organizations. And I just want to touch on that framework because it really is a values statement for this reauthorization. First, we really urge whomever's looking at this federal act or any juvenile justice policy to look at ways to keep children and youth out of the justice system altogether. And we know our wisdom can be brought to bear there. The second is to ensure equity and competence, and I'll touch on that a little bit more. A prior speaker mentioned in your panelist that the disproportionate minority contact requirement really needs an overhaul and an upgrade, and we'll get at that a little bit in a minute with a policy recommendation. Our third principle is to ensure that the responses that we make through the courts, through our community delinquency prevention efforts, our family strengthening efforts, are appropriate to a young person's age and stage of development, and this goes for both sanctions and supports. Again, a lot of detail in your packet that I'm skipping over. But the fourth principle, and you've heard this too, but we would echo it, is to strengthen the federal partnership with states and localities to make that more responsible, to make that field-informed. So you probably know, my second main point, that the reauthorization of the JJDPA is off to a substantially good start. In July of 2008, a bill that was authored by Senators Leahy, Specter, and Cole, and co-sponsored broadly, received bipartisan support, and it contained recommendations, I've told I have 40 seconds to go through these, that are touchstones for what we're looking for in the reauthorization. So I'm going to just skip right to that because it is a favorable platform for you and the next administration and Congress to pick up on. We mentioned the DMC requirement, tools, supports, actual steps for addressing racial and ethnic disparities are needed and required by states and localities. We talked earlier about safeguarding status offenders. In the Senate bill, S-3155, there's a phasing out of the use of the valid court order that would help to remove that exception, which has now swallowed the rule and put too many young people in detention needlessly. We'd also like to see the core protections around jail removal, which is keeping young people out of adult jails, and sight and sound separation between juveniles and adults, extended to all youth in the adult criminal system, so that any young person under the age of 18, even if they're held in an adult facility, would have those same benefits under the JJDPA. Similarly, that would like to hold juvenile offenders over the age of 18 in extended juvenile jurisdiction, where applicable state law allows for that and they have appropriate facilities. In this reauthorization and in this Senate bill, it would allow those states to retain those more vulnerable youth. And then there's a number of different pieces that are absolutely essential. We see the headlines every day. We know what's going on out there. We need to promote policies and standards to eliminate dangerous practices, improve conditions in confinement settings, strengthen behavioral health screening and assessment, and most of all, divert kids whose pressing problems are behavioral health issues away from the system and into family and community-based placements where they can be better served. There's things in this bill to strengthen lots of pieces that have been discussed: reentry, workforce development, juvenile defense. Please take a look at it. In terms of OJJDP, we're looking at two pieces in this Senate bill, all of which have been informed by this broad-based coalition. One is to assist states and localities to achieve and sustain compliance with the JJDPA, and also to use empirically supported, evidence-based, and promising practices with a set of grant programs, improvement grants where they're needed to assist states that are willing to really delve into compliance problems, and incentive grants to assist states that really want to use the best of what we know in juvenile justice. And lastly, you'll see lots of pieces in there to improve the OJJDP focus on the Act itself and its compliance and requirement measures, to increase the research and evaluation function, the training and TA function, increase public transparency. And all of these are very workable within a fairly modest budget. So I hope that you'll take a look at this platform that's been provided and that we can open up some dialogue between our large coalition and all of you. My question is, what would be the best way to move forward this time-sensitive act in the new administration and in the new Congress within the first, say, 6 months? What would you encourage us to do in terms of making those contacts and getting that done?
We have 12 more people. We have only 30 minutes, so I'm going to ask for a very quick response and shorter responses as well, because I don't want anyone to be prevented from putting their point. Go ahead. You want to speak, Senator?
Yes. I think this is the time. I think with the reauthorization of this legislation, it can be used as a vehicle to accomplish all that you're talking about. And I don't want to steal thunder here, but in the ACLU presentation, they have an indication here that then Senator Obama introduced the Positive Behavior for Effective Schools Act. He was the sponsor of that legislation in order to increase our impact on children while they were in school that deals with the issues that we're talking about. I'm dealing in the state Senate in Pennsylvania an issue about wrongful convictions, and he introduced in the Illinois State Senate legislation to deal with that issue and require that all interrogations be recorded. So I haven't done a full research on this, but I'm sure that's just an indication of where he is at, the president-elect is at. And so I think this is your day. This is our day. This is the time that we want to change things, and so you have to just gear up and educate legislators. I can only speak from a legislative point of view, and we're slow learners in a lot of ways. I mean, we listen to our constituency, but sometimes we're maybe about 4 or 5 years behind them. And I think that our constituency now is realizing that we have to be tough on crime, and I'm probably the worst offender. the author of Megan's Law and mandatory sentence on drug dealing, and changing the Constitution in our state several times, facilitate convictions. But that's so, we are trying to get at the violent offenders. But what we've done is we've encapsulated then into that process a lot of other people, like juveniles and other nonviolent offenders, and filled our prisons up and our juvenile facilities up to overcrowding, and it's very, very expensive. I mean, it's a much more better investment to invest in these children and rehabilitate them rather than put them in a juvenile facility, have them contact with juvenile justice system, and then that contact has marred them and as far as their thinking and their approach to society. And then we spent, I think another one of the presentations says it's billions of dollars that we lose because of that. A couple $1 million if we can save that child before he gets to the adult facility and enters into a life of crime. So I think it's important for us to educate our legislators, number one, but also point out the fact that the polling data is that the public is willing to spend money on rehabilitation. That's right. All they have to do is be asked, and I think that we have to educate them on a national level.
We got to give you data. We got to give you research so we can get beyond anecdote, which should inform but not overwhelm. Criminal justice decision making. Right. That's the name of the game.
Let me also say, I just got a text message that Senator Obama is having a special gathering of his new economic team tomorrow in Chicago. Among those people, the governor of Michigan, Jennifer Granholm, the mayor of Los Angeles, Antonio Villaraigosa, Dick Parsons from Time Warner in New York. I would say that you look at what comes out on Saturday from the meeting tomorrow and use that as a point of connection to how you can both fix the economy and do creative things going forward, because that is the focus right now. And normally we would skip over that news. That news that we reported on Saturday is going to be very important to say, what did they say that might create an opportunity with a state official or local official or someone in the business community to see how something like this will help address those issues. So it's out there now, and don't tell them I told you about this email.
I, too, am with Nancy and wearing several hats. My name's Nicole Remsburg. I'm the Executive Director for the Juvenile Detention Centers Association of Pennsylvania. So, Senator Greenleaf, I'm very glad to be here myself, and the rest of the panel. I'm here today representing the National Partnership for Juvenile Services as the President-elect for the National Detention Centers Association. And as the partnership, we are very concerned that OJJDP over the last 8 years has shifted the direction away from training, technical assistance, professional development, research that has actually directly impacted the conditions of confinement. These people that we hire, the ones that work with our kids every day, we can't forget the fact that they need to be adequately trained. They need to be paid. We need to be taking time and investing in recruitment efforts and getting the most appropriate people in there working for our kids. In addition to the Prison Elimination Act of 2003, what can the Obama administration do to address this critical issue of the thousands of juvenile justice professionals nationwide in addressing these issues? And I'm going to combine these together as a respect for the rest of my colleagues so they can speak as well. But the National Partnership would also like the Obama administration to look at calling a White House conference on juvenile justice, and the focal point being reform efforts. I know you have a lot of information in your packets, but also to look at the things that all the associations have done nationwide. In Pennsylvania, we have the MacArthur Foundation in there doing major reform efforts. And I sit on the Mental Health and Juvenile Justice Coordination Committee, and we have done major things. And I can tell you in Pennsylvania, juvenile detention is not just a place anymore or a warehouse. It's part of the process. And it serves as a hub in the juvenile justice system. So I'm proud to say that. And we worked very hard. So I hope with the rest of our colleagues, we can get the rest of the folks on board. So thank you, and please consider having that White House conference on juvenile justice. And you can see all the passionate people in the room would be willing to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. White House conference in the Clinton years with Attorney General Janet Reno. It was very important to be in the White House as opposed to the DOJ. So I hope people will look at that session, which was less fulfilling than I would have hoped, but it is a blueprint for making sure it's not DOJ, but it's at the highest level of the executive branch that we have these discussions. Any other quick comments?
No, if there's a conference, I just like to go to it. That's all.
Yes, next comment.
Good afternoon. My name is Marty O'Brien, and I'm happy to talk about something that works. I'm from the Core Network here in Washington, D.C. We found from our experience implementing the Civic Justice Core model in multiple communities around the country that meaningful public service is a proven strategy for reconnecting disadvantaged youth, including juvenile offenders, to their communities. Service enables young people to reverse their former patterns of behavior. Instead of a drain on society, young offenders can create visible and valued contributions. We feel the Obama administration can improve the juvenile justice system by supporting legislation that includes substantial opportunities for young offenders to perform meaningful public service.
Don't leave. Now, what do you mean by meaningful public service? Particularly, here's the issue. Young, not able to work because of either the record or too young because of other child labor laws. What do you have in mind?
We actually represent service and conservation corps programs around the country, so it's team-based community service, working with out-of-school, out-of-work young adults, 16 to 25 generally, and engaging them in positive community service activities.
Great. Terrific. Any other?
Yeah, I think I'm sorry.
No, I want to respond with two comments. I work with kids who, one, in the District of Columbia have community service requirements, and then two, often have community service as a condition of probation. And what we run up against is placement. And Professor Ogletree alluded to when he talked about the record. So I guess my two responses would be, one is in enhancing the confidentiality laws so that kids can go out into the community and do community service without the stigma over their head about having a criminal record or a juvenile record or even being involved in the system. But then second, this notion, I go back to community education, figuring out how to educate organizations like Conservation Corps, or having Conservation Corps go out into the community and educate other nonprofits about why it's beneficial and why we should not be afraid of these kids. I mean, there's just a pervasive fear of our young people that prevents opportunities. So I wholeheartedly agree with you. I know in D.C. we had a scenario where oh, excellent. Yay. So all that to say, in our jurisdiction, Conservation Corps has worked, too, as a community service opportunity for our kids, not only kids who are already in the community, but kids who are incarcerated who got an opportunity to go out and do community service out of state. And so it can happen, I agree, but we just got to work around it with some legislation.
One thing I want to say about it is we've got to do a much better job in the court system about court-ordered community service. A lot of the community service that we order, frankly, is kind of, we used this phrase last night in Professor Ogletree's class, is sort of clean the steps of the courthouse. Really, my courthouse it's not that important that I have clean steps, But maybe, God forbid, we think about community service in a more expansive way, the court-ordered community service, and incorporate some principles, for example, of restorative justice. We could be a lot more creative in making it meaningful and productive and actually giving kids a path, a way to engage in something that's positive. So I applaud your efforts.
I would just, as a word of caution, as a part of that, which I know the judge is certainly familiar with, when you're putting that as a condition of a sentence, particularly when you talk to youngsters, many of them immature, not really prepared or wondering where they're that can result in an uptick of kids being thrown in for a couple of days in jail because they failed to fulfill their requirements. So it's important, again, to have the right network in place, the judges that understand it, the whole network of people that are understanding what we're entering into, or else you're going to subject a lot of kids to a couple nights in jail. And
or worse. Because, the Attorney General's onto something here because, I think it's true in Massachusetts.
I don't have a judge say that to me a lot, but I appreciate it.
More kids get committed to our youth authorities for violating probation for these so-called technical conditions, or violated on conditions of release that are not bail-related, and then they're violated for technical conditions that are not really offense-related, and end up getting committed to youth authorities, sometimes for long periods of be very, very thoughtful about it.
All right, next comment.
Hi, my name is Ashley with the Sentencing Project here in Washington, D.C., and I was told that we're really low on time, which makes it difficult to talk about racial disparities in the juvenile justice system in a brief manner, but I will say in sum that the overrepresentation of youth of color in our juvenile justice system is absolutely shameful. And the federal focus, which has allegedly been intact for the last 20 years, has done virtually nothing, and in many places DMC is worse in several states and localities around the country. And we find this to be completely unacceptable. We have several recommendations that we could make, but in the interest of time, I'll just say that they're lopped into the areas of personnel, lack of accountability, and a lack of focus on DMC as a local problem. There's been a full-time position at the national level for DMC coordinator for the past several years. Vacant, and we hope that it will be filled immediately by somebody who is competent and can work full-time on juvenile justice and racial disparities, to coordinate local efforts and to disseminate information about what works to reduce racial and ethnic disparities, and to provide ongoing technical assistance to localities and to states. States are supposed to have their funds withheld when they are found to be out of compliance with the core requirement of DMC. However, no state has ever been held out of compliance, and yet DMC is, as I mentioned, worse than ever in many locations. And we wonder why that is, and would hope that the next administration will hold the states and localities accountable by pulling federal funds when they're found to be out of compliance. And finally, the states and localities require regulatory guidance and technical assistance. DMC appears to be working at the local level. There are a lot of promising ways that it's being reduced. The Center for Children's Law and Policy, among other groups, are doing very promising work to reduce racial and ethnic disparities, and we hope that the administration will support these efforts and encourage more like them.
And could you also give the website for the Sentencing Project, which does fabulous work?
Oh, sure. It's sentencingproject.org.
I say that because it's ironic. I remember being here in Washington. It was 19 years ago when we had a conference that I hosted with the Sentencing Project, and getting people to talk about the alarming record that occurred in 1990. It's that for the first time in the history of this country, 1 million people were incarcerated, and we thought that was a high water mark. It will never be surpassed, and it's been doubled since then. And I think Malcolm Young, who preceded Mark Maurer, they've done a lot of important work, and I'm hoping that whatever else we do, we'll have all these email addresses and websites so we can, in a sense, consolidate these wonderful ideas and proposals that about it more constructively. Thank you very much.
Real quick, part of the DMC problem, it's related to this funding issue. As the JJDPA, as the office has lost money, states cynically, probably figure there's not a lot on the table. So some states have really not collected the data, and I'm not patting my state on the back in that regard either, because if you look each point on the continuum, not only police charging, but you got to look at the schools, you got to look at court processing, et cetera. It's a obviously it's a big issue.
Great, thank you. Next comment.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Patricia Macias. I'm a family court judge in El Paso, Texas, and I also serve as president of the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. I've been asked to cut my comments, and so I will only give two, and that is that judges are the gatekeepers of the children in the system. It's the judges who adjudicate children who are sentenced into residential treatment under a dual diagnosis, many times hundreds of miles from their families. It's the judges who adjudicate termination of parental rights. It's the judges who decide whether or not children enter into foster care, and it's the judge's signature who decide whether or not there's disproportionality in our criminal justice system. And my second point is that judges need to be educated, and judges need to be educated on sound child development principles, because we're working with kids, we're not working with adults. And so my call to the Obama administration is to sufficiently resource the capacity for courts to work with children.
Thank you.
I got to comment on my colleague's brilliant remarks.
Yes.
Because brilliant remarks. Because I think one of the part of the whole prioritization or lack thereof of issues involving kids regards this sort of pernicious attitude we have about juvenile courts and family courts across the country that somehow we work in kiddie court. I don't know about your jurisdiction, but where I work, I could terminate a parent's rights. It's a death penalty sentence for a family. I could send a kid to life imprisonment in a youthful offender case. We have jury trials. And in status offense cases, we could separate kids from their families for indeterminate periods of time. So you talk, and also we haven't even talked about the child welfare issues. DMC is as big a problem in the child welfare context, and these systems converge. So if you talk about a system that should be front-ended in resource, it's us, right?
That's right. We agree.
And related to that, and we talked about this, it'll be part of our February 2009 Juvenile Justice Section meeting in Boston, and we really have to look at what the court wrote in Roper versus Simmons. It really is a very valuable resource to educate judges and law enforcement, others about children and what the court has said. And it's a really underutilized tool for all advocates for children to think about what the court said. It didn't just say that you can't execute someone who's under the age of 18, but it talked about the developmental issues of children. And I hope we can incorporate that and like these two judges, to make more judges realize they have tools within their reach. Perhaps we can also think in the new administration how to give judges power that they once had to really make some meaningful alternative.
We should do what they did in Connecticut, raise the age of juvenile court jurisdiction to 18 instead of lowering it, what James Bell has called the abolition of adolescence by categorically putting kids into the adult system. It's the wrong way to go. It doesn't make sense.
Yes, Mr. Lynch.
I would just add to it is that what we are suffering through in Rhode Island, the last legislative cycle, and part of a fallout of bad economic times and miserable political decisions, I suppose, was we reduced at the same time Connecticut, after looking at it and making the decision to increase the age, Rhode Island, thinking they were going to save money, decreased the age from 18 to 17, charging a child as an adult, and then flipped it back, thank goodness, 4 months later. Ruined hundreds of lives in the process, but at least they could wipe the egg off their face and had the fortitude to come back and say they were wrong. The problem is the second part of that in Rhode Island. I'll offer this just to suggest everyone in here should watch in their own states what is happening. I know you are, but we need to all stay vigilant. The second part was it reduced from 21 to 19 the age at which a child or a young adult can stay in the juvenile system. I will tell you, as the Attorney General or District Attorney, however you want to look at me, the number of kids getting waived is going to go up dramatically because you have no room on the far end. And so just beware of those horrible decisions that are actively stay on our toes and stay unified so we can have a voice against measures like that.
All right, next comment.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Bellamy, and I am Legislative Counsel for the American Civil Liberties Union. And we had two recommendations for the President-elect. One was that he work with Congress to support legislation exempting juveniles from the Prison Litigation Reform Act restrictions, and also that the Attorney General would work with the National Prison Rape Elimination Commission to finalize and implement PREA standards and ensure they are inclusive of the needs of LGBT youth. And my question is, since the reforms that are proposed in these particular pieces of legislation are actually helpful within the context of the adult criminal justice system as well, and they have been stagnant for some time, is there an opportunity to perhaps use juvenile justice as a way to bring about reforms also in the adult criminal justice system?
Well, I think there is. This sort of piggybacking on something that I think Roper v. Simmons is a way in, because Roper v. Simmons, in talking about 18 as regards the death penalty, also cites the MacArthur Foundation network research and brain imaging studies, which talk about adolescent development and the brain still developing beyond the age of 18. So, to sort of draw a line in the sand and say at age 17 or at age 16 in New York, the Family Court Act, or at age 18 in Connecticut, everything has changed so dramatically, I think is very, very short-sighted. And I think, again, from a public safety point of view, if we push this notion of being proportional and using limited resources effectively, I think very, very worthwhile agenda that might have some resonance.
Thank you. Next comment.
Hi, my name is Nastasia Walsh. I'm with the Justice Policy Institute. I've been told I have 20 seconds, so I'm going to go really fast.
You have 30 seconds. 30 seconds.
Excellent. All right, so I'd actually like to talk to you guys about something that hasn't been talked about yet today, and that is juvenile sex offending. In 2005, Congress passed the Adam Walsh Act, which, among other things, requires states to include children as young as registries, often for the rest of their lives, in an attempt to protect our children from sexual violence. This policy undermines the very purpose of juvenile justice system in the United States, and we'd like to know what the Obama administration can do to help us to repeal this section of the Adam Walsh Act.
That's great.
Well, one of the big things that I'm concerned about in the Act is in Massachusetts, we can relieve a juvenile from the obligation to register if he receive a sentence of incarceration or detention. That could be out the window. If it just be a priori by virtue of the adjudication, you have to register on your sex offender registry board for, I think it's 25 years under the Act. Some states it's 20 years. Given that rates for juveniles are dramatically lower than they are for adults. And again, this is this issue of using the developmental research and also the reality of some of the cases, because some of the cases we have in juvenile court are not predatory at all. Some of them involve indecent assault and batteries of a sexual nature, and those are all covered by the Act. So they got to go back to the drawing board.
And I think the ABA, I don't know if Jack Hannes here is making some very constructive steps specifically on that you'll be hearing about in terms of addressing those issues, very serious issues, and time for some very constructive reforms. Next comment.
Okay, this is a group effort because I think we have a minute between the three of us, and we all substance abuse and mental health services. That's obviously been a huge topic of conversation, and I think we're all very excited that there's been such emphasis on that. My name is Alexa Eggleston. I'm the Director of Public Policy for the National Council for Community Behavioral Health Care, and I really have one point, and that is that young people should not have to get arrested in order to get mental health and drug treatment services in this country. There are approximately 2 million kids in this country that need access to drug treatment services. About, what's the number? Make sure I get it right. 150,000 get treatment. 150,000 kids out of 2 million are getting drug treatment services, and I think that speaks volumes to why so many kids end up in the system in order to get services. I want to mention real quickly 2 federal agencies that have not come up that I think OJJDP could work very closely with. The Office of National Drug Control is a cabinet level. They have not done very much on this through the last 8 years. They should focus more on it. Also, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, another sort of, I think they suffer from the same problem that OJJDP does. They're a subset of HHS, but I think that's another agency that really needs to be doing more on this issue and could be working with the new administration.
Before you disappear now, is all of this in the testimony that you submitted as well?
The recommendations are in the submitted testimony.
Including the idea that these 3 agencies should be coordinated?
Not ONDCP. It just sort of came to me as I was sitting here.
Well, put it in writing. Put it in writing. That's a very good idea of how do you reconfigure the government effort with resources and ideas and public policy. I think that's the kind of thinking outside the box that's not just about money, but how to use resources already available in an effective and cost savings way. So I hope that you will use that. There's so many mental health cases. We don't even have to repeat that. That is the pink elephant in the room in juvenile justice, that we punish rather than treat the real problem. And what no one said today, maybe it will come, almost everything we see in these teenagers occurred when they were 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7, and we ignored it. And I hope some of our thinking is not just to jump to what's happening now, but take a step back and say, if we'd address this low-weight baby, if we'd address the issue of nutrition, if we'd address the issue of parental support, the things that we could have done that are cost-effective as children before they be labeled delinquents. Right. I mean, think in that way, and not just assume that everyone realizes that almost all of the people who come through the system, we saw some warning signs earlier and we ignored them. How to be involved in prevention. Very important. Thank you. Next comment.
Hi, everyone. My name is Micah Haskell-Hale. I'm representing the American Psychological Association. I would like to associate myself with your comments, Professor Ogletree, and my colleague Alexa here. And our statement is actually on page 61. I would just direct everybody's attention to that portion of the program. But I also wanted to reemphasize the importance of cost-effective, proven, evidence-based programs that prevent violence, including multisystemic therapy, functional family therapy, multidimensional treatment foster care. These are really important things that we have on the ground in all communities and available to the kids that we're talking about. Lastly, I just wanted to also say that our priorities are across a broad spectrum of areas, and I would be remiss if I didn't our focus on female offenders, as well as the needs of individuals with disabilities and their needs and rights, and also the needs of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender youth.
Two quick comments.
I think there's another comment before you.
I'm sorry.
Were you going to make a comment too?
Yes. My name is Heather Dasher. I'm with the National Association of School Psychologists. Since we are short on time, the only point I would like to make is that since schools are where kids spend the most amount of time, that schools are where we need to provide the supports and provide those prevention programs that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And it is also imperative that the federal government fully fund and pass the legislation addressing these needs, such as the Mental Health in the Schools Act.
Well, and let me say to all of you, particularly those who are at the end, my apologies for the idea that you have to force these ideas. I'm glad they're in the book, and I hope you see this as the beginning of a dialogue and not as an end. I remember Stanford versus Kentucky. My classmate, Fred Cowan, won that case in the Supreme Court. He was not elected governor thereafter. I'm not going to tell him why. But it's amazing how the court was skeptical of this important social science in Stanford and how it became very significant in Roper versus Simmons. And it tells us that we need to really think of ways to inform the courts and enhance their ability to make constructive decisions based on that information. And we also hope that there will be justices who will be enlightened by what we heard just a few years ago. Thank all of you for the great comments.
Hi, I'm Patty with the American Humane Association. We're here with Safe Horizon to briefly talk about restorative justice. I trust that you all read what's in your packet, so we're just going to say that it's very critical to reduce reoffending rates and saves lots of money. So we just ask for your support, and Safe Horizon's going to ask our question.
And we're the Safe Horizon Mediation Program. We're practitioners and trainers of restorative justice. And what we would like to know is how can we, as the restorative justice community, assist the panel and the new administration to ensure the promotion of mediation and restorative justice for youth?
And here's the answer. How is restorative justice important in the context of the 21st century challenge in juvenile justice system? What would you say? What is it about restorative justice as something the new president should see is a successful, inclusive, and effective way to address the problems?
Well, it reduces reoffending rates. It's inclusive in that it includes the harmer into the community, and it includes the victims and the harmers and the community at large to address what's actually happened. So rather than an injury to the state, it's an injury to the individuals.
And it also involves public safety as well, in the sense that's the idea that we don't have to say this is, the folks on one side and law enforcement is on the other side. Here's a comprehensive way to think about a problem and look at it in a progressive way. Great, thank you.
Just
yes?
two very quick thoughts about restorative justice. One thing that I would encourage the administration is to see restorative justice as a front-end solution and not on the deep end, not as a sentencing alternative, but as an alternative to processing through the court system at all. And then the second comment that I would make about restorative justice, it goes to this point of technical assistance, training, and support, that all restorative justice programs are not alike across the country. So you've got concerns about power dynamics between the folks who organize the program and the kids who are being served by the program, and we've got to figure out which are the best restorative justice programs in the country and figure out how to replicate those, get the best practices out across the state.
You also, if you're talking about front-ending on restorative justice, you got to think about those due process issues. Presumption of innocence. I mean, those are, you got to be really thoughtful about that. So you need buy-in from prosecutors and defense.
Yes, thank you very much. Next comment.
Hi.
We're a panel of 3 on conditions of confinement, and we're just going to each briefly introduce ourselves for 15 seconds and end with a question. And I'll start off. I'm Judy Starant with the National Disability Rights Network. We are the National Association of Protection and Advocacy Agencies that are located in every state that advocate on behalf of people with disabilities, all disabilities, including adults and children. P&A agencies monitor conditions in facilities and try to correct dangerous practices. We're very concerned about the number of youth with disabilities in the juvenile justice system. You all know the magnitude of the problem. And our concern is that juvenile justice facilities are not safe places. Many are overcrowded, unsanitary, unsafe, and understaffed, and there's just a terrible need for accountability and transparency.
Hi, I'm Ned Lochran. I'm the Executive Director of the Council of Juvenile Correctional Administrators, which represents all the state directors of juvenile corrections, including the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico.
Good seeing you, Ned.
Good seeing you, Mr. Ogletree, and Jay Blitzman.
Former DUAS Commissioner, Massachusetts.
With a grant from OJJDP under the Clinton administration when Shay was the director, we developed a set of performance-based standards for juvenile detention and correctional facilities. You have a lot of it in your write-ups. Right now, 200 out of 1,000 facilities are participating. It's fee-based and it's voluntary. My recommendation to the new administration is that a set of standards that ultimately gets adopted be paid for, funded through OJJDP, and also that they be mandatory. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Dana Schoenberg. I'm from the Center for Children's Law and Policy here in D.C., and I want to thank you all for raising the issue of conditions of confinement. You know, there are kids every day in facilities in this country that are getting injured, and occasionally youth who die because of inappropriate restraint and isolation practices and other dangerous conditions and dangerous practices in juvenile facilities. I have my list of the ways in which the Obama administration could serve as leaders to improve conditions in facilities. But with limited time, I think the thing that we all agree panel is that we need to have mandatory standards at the national level that guide things like seclusion and restraint practices in juvenile facilities, because they're there for Medicaid, for psychiatric facilities, but not for juvenile facilities, and there aren't mandatory standards for other areas of conditions of confinement. So our question for you is how you think are the best ways to achieve that and what you see as realistic possibilities in the Obama administration.
I just want to mention collaborative problem solving. That's another form of treatment that's been pioneered by Dr. Ross Green in Boston. He's consulted with the Correctional Authority in Maine. Has dramatically reduced the use of chemical and physical restraint, again, dealing with oppositional youth in a non-oppositional way. It's also a very, very effective treatment, outpatient treatment. As regards the court piece, we got to think more thoughtfully about the kids we're putting into the system, and we've talked a lot about the pipeline.
Let me just say 2 things. A friend of mine is Judge Reginald Walters on the federal court here, Republican. He was a crime czar with Bush 1, and he's been holding hearings about the violence against youth in confinement. Did anyone testify before his commission? I don't know if the report's out, but I talked to him in September, and what he has to say is not kind about the system. And it seems to me, I hope that report's out by January, because it will be a powerful statement about confinement and what happens to children. They still are children. And I think getting someone like that, a Republican, independent federal judge who's looked at it, who's also was a former crime czar, is very important to say he saw something that just shocked him in the way that we've allowed things to happen in our facilities, both in detention and in committed facilities. And that's a good sign of painting the picture. They're being punished twice. Once by the determination that they are involved in a crime, and secondly by being physically in a plant or a place that allows those things to happen, and third, by the collateral consequences on them psychologically, emotionally, and what it feeds into going forward. So this is one of the most important areas, and I'm glad that you are sharing those ideas. Others who have comments, don't feel that you have to ask a question at this late today. Tell us what you want us to hear, given the time constraints, and not ask a fake, cut to the chase.
I go ahead?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Miriam Rollin, and I'm the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Fight Crime and of more than 4,000 police chiefs, sheriffs, DAs, and crime victims who are interested in preventing crime before it happens by giving kids the right start in life. Effective research-based crime reduction efforts for kids start even before a child is born and continue until adulthood. A few examples: voluntary home visiting for at-risk pregnant moms and parenting moms, like the Nurse Family Partnership, can cut child abuse and neglect in half and reduce kids and moms later arrest by about 60%, saving $5 for every dollar invested. At-risk kids who were left out of the high-quality Perry preschool program were 5 times more likely to become chronic offenders by age 27 than those who participated.
And take your time. You have to say. I know the clock. Take your time. You want to hear this.
I was told to hurry. So
take your time.
High-quality early education like Perry can return $16 for every dollar invested. High-quality after-school programs like Boys and Girls Clubs connect at-risk youth to caring adults, constructive activities during the prime time for juvenile crime, 3 to 6 p.m. Housing projects without the programs had 50% more vandalism, 37% more drug activity. Once a young person becomes a serious juvenile offender, there are programs that involve both the youth and the parents in intensive behavior modification therapeutic approaches that can turn kids around. For example, and we've heard some of the examples, MST, functional family therapy can cut juvenile recidivism in half and saves the public $32,000 per juvenile treated. And I have copies available here of our Safer Streets report that outlines the MST, MTFC, and FFT and a variety of other evidence-based approaches. There are a few other programs for kids that have proven crime prevention benefits. Please see our website. Our material is in the book.
Give us your website.
www.fightcrime.org. And our material is in the book on page 80. Despite research-proven effectiveness and savings, there's huge unmet need. For example, Nurse Family Partnership home visiting program can reach about 20,000 at-risk new mothers annually. Head Start serves about half of the eligible pre-K age kids, and Early Head Start serves of the birth to 3-year-old kids. More than 14 million kids are unsupervised during the after-school hours. Too many juvenile offenders cannot access the evidence-based programs that we've talked about because they don't exist in many places around the country. We can do better, and we can't afford not to do better. Through better prioritization of federal budgets and appropriations bills, through legislation, through administrative action, to make sure that more of what's spent is spent on what's proven to work, our nation can promote the well-being of kids, can promote public safety, make us all safer for years to come. Our law enforcement leaders and crime victims, thank you for this forum.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon. My name is Associate with the Children's Defense Fund, and I just wanted to call attention to our written statement. The Children's Defense Fund has outlined 6 policy priorities to secure our nation's future and the future of our children, and the first 3 priorities are really geared towards intervention and not necessarily, just focusing on reforming the juvenile justice system. And I just really wanted to make that point. And outlined in our priorities, we've also put a few legislative solutions that the new administration can consider as they really try to issue of how to improve the quality of our children's lives. And please consider the Children's Defense Fund a resource.
And also make sure you look at the Children's Defense Fund report issued last September, From the Cradle to the Prison, a remarkable report that all of us have learned from. And the most startling thing is just not the dialogue, but seeing this young Latino kid, he's so small, being processed, he has to stand on a crate in order to be fingerprinted. And that story's told over, and these are still children treated like little adults. And that's a phenomenal part of the problem. Patrick?
Just on one, I'm signed on with Fight Crime, Investing Kids, and I want to thank you for your comments as well. Just one, I know we're hearing a lot of stats kicked around, but one that resonates, of all of them do, I think with all of us, but one I may have missed if you said it quickly because you were hustling, but one that I've looked at is that 2.7 million kids are abused or neglected. And I want to just take a little offshoot on that. That I think I would ask you all to think about. I passed the law in Rhode Island called the Lindsay Ann Burke Act following the death of a young woman in domestic violence homicide. What we started to look at it was the lack of domestic violence education for young kids, and what we did was we mandate domestic violence education from grade 7 to 12. And I know, because I spoke to colleagues and legislators across this nation, that you'll find, if you go back to your state, what I found in mine, that there are wonderful programs, but then there are tremendous voids. And I have a 12-year-old daughter. When you start to look at those facts, you just hit a couple of them, we start to lose kids to substance abuse, or they perpetuate domestic violence, but there's an enormous volume of crime and issues that are created there. And I know these groups that are stepping up focus on that, and I just want to praise you for your efforts. Thanks.
Okay, next presentation.
Good afternoon. My name is Ling Vuong.
You can bring the microphone down so we can hear you. Yep.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Ling Vuong, and I'm from the National Council on Crime and Delinquency. Today, we'd like to bring your attention to the growing segment of girls within the juvenile justice population. These girls are young, and they require different services than their male counterparts. A staggering statistic, girls are 11 times more likely to die while incarcerated than boys.
Hello, my name is Malika Saad Assar. I'm with the Rebecca Project for Human Rights. Very briefly, I met a young girl, 13 years old. She had survived being raped by her uncle, and she had become pregnant with another man's child as a way to protect herself from being violated by her uncle. I did not meet her at a incest survivors support group or a special program for teen moms. I met her in Delaware's JJ program. And Serena's story is representative of so many girls who are in the JJ system. Most of our girls share a narrative of being sexually abused. Most of our girls who are in JJ are there because of sexual violence. Most of our girls are arrested for prostitution and for running away. Why are they prostituting themselves? What are they running away from? And so I urge, in the way that the Obama administration looks at JJ reform, that we don't forget about our girls, and that in the way we talk about JJ reform for our girls, we do it from the lens of recognizing the interplay between violence, sexual violence, trauma, and what our vulnerable girls experience. And treadmilled into JJ because of issues related to sexual violence. There are programs that know how to serve these girls, programs that are strength-based, and programs that look at the issues between trauma and violence and girls. Thank you.
Hi, my name is April Osajima, and I'm the Public Policy Director for Girls, Inc., formerly Girls Clubs of America, and we do summer programs and after-school programs for predominantly. And I first want to remind everyone, we're speaking about girls, but that girls are a part of all of the issues that have been addressed before us. Gangs, girls are in gangs, girls are little sisters in gangs and sexually service gang members. Girls are disproportionately status offenders. Girls have different mental health issues than boys. And so we need to address all of these issues with a gender perspective as well. The JJDPA currently requires states to have a plan for addressing needed gender-specific services, but we strongly suspect from reading state plans that states are not necessarily complying with that requirement, and we would love for an Obama administration to try to bring up the level of compliance and attention to that provision. And my third point is very brief, that we've heard from previous speakers. Prevention is effective and very important, and gender-specific services are very important and effective. So, ergo, gender-specific prevention programs are also very effective, and we encourage specific attention and funding to those. Thanks.
Thank you.
My name is Chris Siegfried. I work for the National Center for Child Traumatic Stress. We represent a network of federally funded grantee sites around the country in 31 states working on issues of child and adolescent trauma. I just want to use my time to affirm and support the comments that have been made previously by the mental health and the conditions of confinement speakers. I think they were right on the money. I do want to remind you that many, and some studies show the majority of children coming into the juvenile justice system have a history of trauma. We know that trauma histories are related to later substance abuse, later victimization, violent offending, recidivism, etc. So anything the new administration can do to make the juvenile justice system itself less to make juvenile facilities reduce the risk of injury there, both by staff and by other people, and reduce re-traumatization of youth, we would support that wholly.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Mitru Charlante. I'm director of the Teen Victim Initiative at the National Center for Victims of Crime. First of all, I want to thank you for ensuring that we had youth leadership on these issues today, and I look forward to that continuing with this new administration. I really support the comments that my colleagues just made, so I'll just add on that in addition to these recent statements, we're interested in seeing how the new administration can improve the links between victim advocates and the juvenile justice system to ensure that these youth who enter the system with histories of victimization and abuse have access to interventions, counseling, advocacy, re-education about violence and victimization, and very important safety planning that victim advocates can provide to prevent victimization when they return home to their community and their homes that sometimes are not a safe place for them. Thank you.
Thank you all. And I just want to say that the impact of our juvenile justice system on girls is just traumatic and overwhelming. And I hope that you will look very carefully at the history of First Lady Michelle Obama. As I might have said earlier, she was a legal aid attorney in law school, and so she's very familiar with what happens to families and children. And I would suggest a very fast route to get some attention is to invite the First Lady to see some of what you've described and to see the horrors, particularly as a mother of two daughters, imagining that this is what people are going through. So I think it creates an unusual opportunity in a fast track to say this is not just one of the element of 30 problems. This is a centerpiece of the problem when over half of our population is women, and we're talking about what women can accomplish, and we're ignoring those below the radar. And the only thing I would disagree with saying that these folks are in the JJ system. They're in the JD system, juvenile delinquency. There's no justice in what you describe. It's not the juvenile justice system. And that's the goal, to get to the justice system. I think that's what we're all talking about.
Could I make one comment?
To the justice.
Could I make a very, very powerful presentation? Because I think how we're treating adolescent females in the system, however you characterize it, is abominable. They're the ones who are primarily victimized by the VCO, the valid court order. They're the ones who are primarily victimized by inappropriate bail decisions by people like me, who are holding them for services that we don't give them, and they tend to be held longer than adolescent males who actually are accused of violent crime. So to arrest them as status offenders seems perverse. To hold them, to protect them, and not give them services violates the presumption of innocence and is just cruel and unusual. So it's a huge issue, and I think some of this can be redressed through the JJDPA amendment, I'm hoping.
Great. Next presentation.
Thank you. I'm Erin Davies of the Campaign for Youth Justice, and we're the last folks standing between you all and the reception, so we'll keep it brief.
Take your time.
We will. And our organization represents kids who are transferred to the adult system. Transfer has very negative effects, including increasing later crimes committed by these youth. So the three recommendations that we have are supporting the Act for JJ recommendation to expand jail sight and sound to youth in the adult system. We ask that President-elect Obama oppose or veto any legislation that would increase the number of youth transferred into the adult system, and that more data be collected at the federal and state levels on youth who are transferred. We don't have hardly any data on this population. So I'll also...
Oh, that's not true.
Another presenter on this topic.
Yeah. So. We got some data. It's all bad.
I'm Sarah Breyer from the National Juvenile Justice Network and the National Coalition for the Fair Sentencing of Children, and I wanted to talk about life without the possibility of parole. The U.S. the only country that sentences kids to life without parole, and we have more than 2,500 kids in this country, some as young as 13, who we've decided are beyond rehabilitation and beyond hope. So I would encourage the Obama administration to take a leadership role in ending the transfer of youth into the adult court and ending our use of the sentencing children to die in prison.
Could I comment? We do have some research on the transfer thing. We do have some research, and all the research shows that the current policy compromises public safety. Donna Bishop has done a very good study of the Florida system, which presumptively puts kids into the adult system through prosecutorial waiver. Jeffrey Fagan has done independent work in New York and has also worked with Donna Bishop, and there are a variety of studies. Richard Redding, I think, has worked on it. A variety of resources. The states that have the highest number of kids tried as adults have the highest recidivism rates. So,
and just to clarify, I was saying we have that research that shows increased recidivism. What we don't have is the hard numbers on how many youth are actually transferred to each state.
There's also a disturbing reason for concern that those of us in the court system are relying solely on the nature of the offense, not on the nature of the offender, as Kent envisioned. We're not using those other factors. We're not using the developmental stuff that we're supposed to be using. As regards to life without parole, it's sort of the trade-off for states like Massachusetts, where we don't have the death penalty. The problem with life without parole is that 26% of the kids, based on maybe it was your submission, 26% of the kids who are now serving life without parole, and we have about 2,500 in the country, were adjudicated for what we call felony murder. So they might have been, they might have been a young adolescent, they might have been 14 or 15, they might have been present when a felony, like a predicate felony, like a robbery, was committed. So you got to think developmentally. Does it make sense? So we've got to think more about blended sentencing, look back provisions, create an incentive for kids that protect public safety, so that there's an opportunity to show a record of improvement, and then revisit the issue, perhaps of transfer, or revisit the sentencing. Massachusetts had that system. Of our transfer hearing system, we went to the youthful offender system. Some states do blended sentencing, so we've got to be a lot more creative, and I think your research supports that.
Let me also, before we end, Shay didn't know I was going to call on him, but now that I see he's here, if he'll come to the microphone, I'm just nostalgic about the juvenile justice. And say a word, unless he has some conflict. I think that things were done, and I think that we've got a good roadmap to follow. Shay?
Well, you have been the recipient of 2 hours of some real pent-up energy and commitment that's out there about these issues, and it's clear that whatever has been temporarily suppressed is on the Obama administration. What is terrific is that we have an administration coming in who shares the values. I also want to say that I think what needs to be said is there are a lot of career staff at OJJDP who share those values, who are ready to run with this course of action, and we need to understand that as we move forward. I want to echo what Chris said. The main advice I could give as a prior administrator is that this administration, in the transition process, respect that juvenile justice deserves its own platform, not one subservient to criminal justice. Do they need to be held in tandem with one another? Yes. But I'm hoping there'll really be a transition committee on juvenile justice and a real focus on what needs to happen to lift up our efforts nationally in this area. In addition, I think we need to focus on 2 periods of time. Today to January 20th, how do we really assess what's happening at OJJDP and move away from that's been taken on there, again, not by the career staff, and understand the platform exactly where we are, because a lot of the things we've talked about today are percolating there. They just need to be resurfaced again. And then what happens on January 20th when an acting administrator must be named so we don't lose traction. But a permanent appointment probably won't be made and confirmed for months. But we can't lose that time on reauthorization. We can't lose that time in re-engaging the field. So I think the administration needs to look at who is there that could be an acting administrator as well as the more long-term appointment to start on this long path to recovery. Great. But thank you, Professor Ogletree, and the panel. It was a marvelous discussion.
Great. Thank you. let me close by saying this. I recall vividly being on, I think, Crossfire back in early '93 with Pat Buchanan and I can't remember the host's name, who were saying how outrageous it was that President Clinton, only 3 months in office, was firing all of the U.S. attorneys and replacing them. They asked me, did I think that was outrageous? I said, yes, it was outrageous that it took him 3 months to get it done. Right. I say that to say that it's a very challenging time for juvenile justice, and Shay is right about the need to do things now. And we were originally going to hold this meeting later, and I won't mention Judge Blitzman by name, but one of the panelists said, what if Obama doesn't win? Am I still coming to Washington? I said, yes, Washington is where we have our transfer to go to Bermuda on a one-way ticket. So we don't need to use those tickets today. And I think it is a time for optimism, because we have people who are grounded in the community, who understand what it means to reform the system, who's concerned about costs, but also innovative in how those costs can be achieved. I'm glad to hear what I've been worried about, that there are good career people, and I'm hearing that in civil rights and other offices, because that's very important. Those are people who know where the bodies are buried, and I think that's an important element of leading. You can't remove everyone just because you have the power to do that. And I think the smart approach will be to take advantage of people who've been there through both the tide being low, to make some remarkable differences. So I think it's going to be really remarkable to have two adolescents, two children in the White House. They're going to be having sleepovers. And so it's going to be a whole new experience for parenting to and they should not have a Kodak moment by, my God, there are kids my age who are in detention, who have been committed, who have been abused. And I hope the picture will be that we're going to stop this insane system. And I'm not blaming it on 8 years. We've had the system long before 2000. And our goal is to try to treat children as children and respect the fact that if we give them the nurturing, the support, and the hope, that they will grow to be wonderful adults. This campaign has been about investing in young people. I think it was after midnight on Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, I think I got about 5 million resumes from people who've been in the campaign. And my point is that you don't all have to work in Washington. There's important work all over the country. And much politics, as Tip O'Neill would say, is local and not national or global. It's local. And the fact that we have so many people here and that you came on the hope that there would be something to talk about and with an agenda is absolutely wonderful. And I really like the way that you went from telling us what you wanted us to hear to asking these questions when you really wanted to tell us, let's get busy, and ultimately, yes, we can. Thank all. And the reception starts, right? Enjoy the reception. Thank you.
That's right. I'm getting my $10 million for that question.